Okay, so I finished this book, Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. Pretty good book. It was actually a pretty good read. It took me about 7, 8 hours to finish this thing. Um, this book's actually one of the more interesting that I've read in recent years because looking at emotion from looking at emotional intelligence, understanding your emotions, knowing why you're in a particular state, understanding how to manage them, things like that. I'd never really looked at myself as a person who was emotionally imbalanced, and I don't believe I am. By and large, I'm perfectly stable. It's only during situations of high duress or high stress that my emotions tend to overwhelm reason, and that's one of the things that Daniel talks about here. There's actually a couple passages, or a couple passages that I cited here that I wanted to kind of discuss. The first one, he talks about a family. He talks about emotion overriding reason. And he says, it was a tragedy of errors. 14-year-old Matilda Crabtree was playing a practical joke on her father. She jumped out of a closet and yelled boo, as her parents came home in one morning from visiting her parents. But Bobby Crabtree and his wife thought Matilda was staying with friends that night. Hearing noises as he entered the house, Crabtree reached for his .357 pistol and went into Matilda's bedroom to investigate. When his daughter jumped out of the closet, Crabtree shot her in the neck. Matilda Crabtree died 12 hours later. The position that he makes here, the stance he takes here, is that oftentimes that we're of two minds, right? That we have our logical side and we have our unreasonable side. And in fact, there was another really good passage that he cited where he actually referenced the writings of another person. In many or most moments, these minds are exquisitely coordinated. Feelings are essential to thought to feeling. But when passions surge, the balance tips. It's the emotional mind that captures the upper hand, swamping the rational mind. The 16th century humanist Erasmus of Rotterdam wrote a satirical vein of his perennial tension between reason and emotion. And then, of course, Erasmus said, Jupiter has bestowed far more passion than reason. You could calculate the ratio as 24-1. He set up two raging tyrants in opposition to reason's solitary power, anger and lust. How far reason can prevail against the combined forces of these two, the common life of man, makes quite clear. Reason does the only thing she can and shouts herself hoarse, repeating formulas of virtue, while the other two bid her go hang herself and are increasingly noisy and offensive until at last their ruler is exhausted, gives up, and surrenders. The notion of being of having extreme passion, the way it's presented here by Daniel Goleman, the current emotional state of people. He presents it initially as a biological imperative, right? Take for example the emotion of fear. It's one of the things he talks about, the emotion of fear. In this book, he makes these different cases. He talks about like the early days of humanity and a state of nature. And I don't mean a state of nature in like a moral, philosophical, and political station, which is to say society absent an order government. I say a state of nature in the sense of like separate groups that are living and totally disconnected and are really just kind of left at the behest of whatever their environment is. Take for example, like 30,000 years ago when people traveled from Europe across what's now Russia through what's now Alaska and down through the Canadian territories onto the west coast of what's now the United States, and then started settling along bodies of water. If people at that point in time, as primitive as we were really left to our own devices and were like beholden to the territory around us. And so the only real weapon people had against predators was to flee. That was it. That's why in the early days, if two hunters are out and they're foraging for food or doing what have you, and they hear a rustling in the bushes, the one who runs away lives longer than the one who goes to investigate, because it's the only real tool that we had. But as people began to grow and people began to progress and began to evolve, then we were able to develop weapons to even the playing field. And so if we ended up in the Serengeti or ended up in the Savannah Desert or the African Savannah somewhere, and a lion comes running up on us, a lioness comes to attack us after having stalked us for, half a day or something like that, then we have a gun. We can shoot back. We don't just have to hope that we're fast enough to get away. We're not equal to like wildebeests and whatever else those things eat. I don't know, like antelope. But in any event, The argument that Daniel Goleman presents here, not really the argument, but the position Daniel Goleman presents here is saying that the current emotional state of human beings is a byproduct of the fact that the evolutionary focus of people has shifted. We're no longer in a state of fight or flight constantly. Like, we're no longer constantly in fear for our lives. We've developed technology and different things like that have made us a dominant species on the planet. So barring the fact that we're dropped into the ocean with nothing more than our wits, then, we will be fine surviving out there if we have like a shark cage or something like that. But if we're just floating in the water by ourselves, then we're helpless against a shark. But because of the fact that humanity has evolved the way it has, but because of the fact that we still have an emotional state, because we still feel, we still love, we still hate, then it means that like those emotions begin to shift around. They begin to move around and manifest themselves in ways that normally would have been reserved for like fear of a circumstance. And so where it's no longer fear of being eaten by a predator, now it's fear of a relationship ending. Now it's fear of, getting into a fight. I don't know, something like that. And because of that, because those aren't emotions that we're used to dealing with on a daily basis, when those emotions do handle themselves, people don't always know how to react to them. The emotions overwhelm their reason. And where that was okay back then, it's not necessarily okay now. And in fact, here's kind of a cool thing, because he asked the question later on in the book. It's in which chapter is this? Chapter 5. He asked the question, why is emotional literacy something that's not readily taught to people? Why is that something that's not, like, people aren't necessarily taught to manage their emotions in reasonable ways? And he asked a question here. He says, it began as a small dispute, but it escalated. Ian Moore, a senior at Thomas High School in Brooklyn, and Tyrone Sinclair, a junior, had a falling out with a buddy, 15-year-old Khalil Sumter. Then they started picking on him and making threats. And then it exploded. Khalil, scared that Ian and Tyrone were going to beat him up, bought a .38 caliber pistol and brought it to school one morning, and 15 feet from the schoolyard, shot both boys to death at point-blank range in the school's hallway. This incident, chilling as it is, can be read as yet another sign of a desperate need for lessons in handling emotions, settling disagreements peaceably, and just plain getting along. Educators, long disturbed by school children's lagging scores in math and reading, and realizing there's a different and more alarming deficiency, which is basically emotional literacy. And while laudable efforts have been made to raise academic standards, this new and troubling deficiency is not being addressed in the standard school curriculum. As one Brooklyn teacher put it, the present emphasis in schools suggests that we care more about how well school children can read and write than whether they'll be alive next week. It's interesting because he asked the question, why isn't this being taught to people? And I think that in a lot of ways, it's one of the things that you're sort of taught to, your society relies on like your parents to teach you that and life experience to teach you that. And in a lot of ways it has. But as I told you guys, being like head over heels for someone is not something that I've readily felt before. At least I will say this. I guess I have been head over heels for someone. I've never clicked with someone the way I clicked with my ex. Like, not once in my entire life. Like, of all the women I've ever known, all the female friends I ever had, all the people that I ever came in contact with, the friends that I've known since high school, not one of them had I ever clicked in such a way, the way that I clicked with her. And it really felt like one of those circumstances where fear overrode reason. The fear of losing something, yet again, losing the one thing I want the most, which is this particular girl, that overrode reason, and maybe this is just how things go. And there will be people who will say that's good or bad. There'll be people who say it's good, there are people who say it's bad. They'll say it's good because they'll say, well, people don't get angry about things they don't care about. And they'll say that, that it's a bad thing because you can't let your emotional state override your reason. But it's interesting. It's presenting a funny circumstance, or I guess a bit of knowledge on this journey that I'm going on at the moment. Having said that, it is a really good book. It is one that I would highly suggest you read if you're looking for more of like a bioevolutionary stance on emotion and how it applies to the way things were then versus how they are now. Pretty solid reading. I mean, I would suggest you guys check it out. But yeah, no, it really shed some light on why I reacted the way that I did. And I'm looking to see what else these other books have to offer. So 1 book down, 5 more to go. I may end up doing it every other day because I feel like, because for me, I don't really take notes when I read. Like I go through and if it's material that I find to be wildly fascinating, then I can ingest it and remember it really, really well. That's why you guys hear me quote things like Alice in Wonderland off the top of my head, and like Treasure Island and so on, because they're things that mean something to me. If it's boring to me, then I just don't really care about it and I lose interest in it. Comic books are the exact same way. Rick Remender's run is the first run of Captain America that I read in 20 years, or really Ed Brubaker, then Rick Remender. So Ed Brubaker's run of Captain America was the first run I'd read in like 20 years, and then Rick Remender's run. Well, I guess I read the other runs, but skimmed through them more than I read them, and didn't really care about them. Okay, Ed Brubaker's run is the first run I cared about in 20 years. There we go. That's a more accurate statement to make, I think. But still, I may take it every other day because I don't really, if it's cool to me, I remember it fine, and I'm easily absorbed into it, but I want to make sure I'm actually digesting it, because it's one thing to like read through and say cool and then move on, and it's another to like read through and understand it. So pretty good. It's a pretty good book, pretty good read. But anyway, I figured I'd share that with you guys. I might do that, kind of detail this experience that I'm going through with these different books that I'm reading, and get a feel for understanding what all's going on. But anyway, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.